In this video, we are going to look at the vital astrology of the upcoming solstice that will occur at 1822 Greenwich Mean Time on the 21st of December this year. In my opinion, there is a lot of potential for some very positive manifestations to arise from it. However, the astrology of any particular day is not an island unto itself. It is part of a dance of essential purposes. So in attempting to understand how things might manifest in a future time, it helps to look at how they have been manifesting previously in the run-up to it. That is because any given moment in time is one frame in the movie of life. It contributes its own unique purpose, but that is a continuation of an ongoing story. So first, let's explore some previous frames in life's movie, which can add a lot of clarity to the chart of the upcoming solstice. The first of these is quite a few years ago, but bear with me because it is the key to some amazing information. A couple of years ago, the Enter the Stars Reloaded YouTube channel uploaded a video which examined a freakish event that happened on the 10th of September 1987. I will leave a link to the video in the description. In September of 1987, the Pope visited America and was due to lead a Mass in San Antonio, Texas, before 350,000 people. A huge altar had been constructed for the Mass. It took the form of a flattened step pyramid, topped by a superstructure of two towers that were 110 feet high. 2 days before the Pope led the Mass, the superstructure collapsed. Thankfully, nobody was hurt, but there was no time to rebuild before the day of the visit, only to clear away the tangled mess of scaffolding. This event was so unusual and interesting that I decided to take a look at its astrology. This is the chart of the collapse. For brevity, I am going to call it the Pope's chart. There is a lot that could be said about it, but I am not going to analyze it in depth. All I want to do is point out some very significant details. Saturn, whose glyph is being indicated by the arrow pointer, is at 14 degrees and 56 minutes of Sagittarius. The coloured lines in the middle of the chart indicate connections between planets. If we follow this red line from Saturn, we find that it connects Saturn to the Sun, which was in Virgo on that day. We can see that this connection is very significant because Saturn is the planet of authority, and the Sun that of what some might call the creative will of God. Since religions tend to impose a false human authority upon creative will, the Pope is a manifestation of such an essence. The tarot card, the lightning-struck tower, depicts unreal Saturnian authority as a tower being blasted by the truth of a new Uranian paradigm. Notice that Uranus was in conjunction with Saturn at the time and also square to the Sun. The line represents what is called a square aspect in astrology. It is a challenging connection. Mercury, messenger of the gods, is also playing a major role in the chart. So what is being depicted in the chart might be summarized as a creative notice being communicated about the fall of an illegitimate spiritual authority. We will also see later that Saturn's position at the time was extremely significant. Enter the Stars found out about this freakish event because it happened in the year halfway between the opening of a certain complex of buildings and the infamous event in 2001 when its most significant features fell. I am not going to name that event because it might trigger a certain AI to endanger this video, and I don't want to make it a BitChute exclusive because I want this information to reach as wide an audience as possible. Also, BitChute resolution is too low to be kind to the charts. Here is the chart of that event. You can see from its name and date which event I am referring to. Let's follow Enter the Stars lead and call it Nina Elven's chart. I am not going to say anything about the truth of what actually happened on that date. There are plenty of videos about that elsewhere. We are just going to look at the astrological essences of that moment and their bearing on the astrology of 2020, of which the coming solstice is a key part. The first thing I want to point out is that Saturn is at 14 degrees and 45 minutes of Gemini. Gemini is otherwise known as the twins. So in Nina's chart, Saturn was almost exactly opposite his position in the Pope's chart. Once again, we can follow a red line and see that it is connected to the Sun, which is in Virgo as before. Now, however, another planet has joined the mix. Pluto is at 12 degrees and 38 minutes of Sagittarius, strongly square to the Sun and in opposition to Saturn. The three planets form this red triangle pattern, which is called a T-square, and is the most challenging structure one can find in a chart. Mercury is playing an even more prominent role in this chart. Notice that he is forming a big green triangle with Saturn and Uranus, whose combination we have already seen has the essence of the lightning-struck tower. Mercury also makes blue connections to Pluto and Venus, the latter being the planet that rules Libra, the sign that Mercury is in. Blue and green connections are harmonious and tend to manifest in ways that are more obviously helpful. Taken together, all these connections to Mercury served to broadcast Nina's disastrous birthday party to virtually everyone around the world. Even though the event seemed very negative, we can see that these Mercury connections were acting in a powerful way to communicate a truth that exposed abuse and thus blasted an old paradigm of authority. As a result of this event, people have become less and less trusting of authority over the years. Once again, I am not going to analyze this chart in detail, but much of what I am going to say later about a chart for the 13th of January 2020 can be extrapolated to Nina's chart. So most of what I will say about that chart also applies to Nina's. Indeed, the similarities between them are amazing. In addition to the connection of Sun, Saturn and Pluto in Nina's chart, we see that the North Node was in Cancer. The profound significance of that will be explained later. It is made more significant by the fact that Jupiter is also in Cancer, something which I observed at the time to manifest strongly. Jupiter is what is called exalted in Cancer, which means it is the sign that suits him best, even more so than Sagittarius, which is the home of his throne. Jupiter in Cancer represents an abundance of motherly nurturing and familial concern. After Nina's birthday, we witnessed hard-nosed financial executives who tend to represent the harshness of Saturn and the opposite sign Capricorn go on TV. Men who were probably busy competing with each other in a cutthroat financial struggle the day before now talked emotionally about the need to care for the families of those who had died. This also reflected the fact that the moon is in conjunction with the North Node in the chart and is opposed by both Chiron, planet of truth, and Mars, planet of aggression, who is very ambitious in Capricorn. When I compared this chart with the Pope's chart, I pondered the fact that they both seemed to have occurred after the Sun's challenge to Saturn had passed its peak. In my experience, events tend to manifest most powerfully as a planet is applying to its peak influence, and events after the peak tend to be subsequent progressions of manifestations that happened before it. This prompted me to dig a little deeper, and I found something amazing. In his video, Enter the Stars expressed an ambivalence about whether the Pope-related event was a planned sacrificial ritual by those I call the lowliest slaves of the power ethic, or plutocrats for short. He thought it may have been a warning to them from God. I am similarly ambivalent. Clearly, all these events I am presenting are clear manifestations of the essences depicted in their charts. That may be the only reason why they seem to be tied together so synchronously. However, the event I uncovered next seems to suggest otherwise. When I noticed that the Sun was past his peak challenge to Saturn in this chart, I reasoned thusly. If I was so ignorant as to think it was a good idea to perform a ritual to gain power over other souls, and wanted to use astrology to time it, I would time the ritual to be performed just as the relevant planet was approaching its peak influence. So I looked back to see when the Sun came into his peak challenge to Saturn. This is the chart for that event. It happened late in the evening of the 6th of September, 5 days before Nina's birthday. So I looked to see what significant event might have occurred at that time. I was gobsmacked by what I uncovered. There was indeed a ceremony performed at that time. Normally, the MTV Music Awards were held in California, but in that year they were held in New York. One of the winning bands, Limp Bizkit, made a music video of their song in which they were seen playing on top of one of the Saturn in Gemini structures. I will leave a link to the video in the description. This extraordinary coincidence is actually mentioned in a Wikipedia article about the awards ceremony, although said article is oblivious to the astrology of it. Does this mean that the ceremony was a ritual? Not necessarily. Again, it may just have been the workings of astrology playing themselves out. However, if certain people wanted subconsciously to implant a hypnotic message to trust what authority said about the future event, then the ceremony seems to me to be a good way to try to do so. Before I proceed to examine the chart of the 13th of January 2020, I want to show you something interesting that I discovered in my investigations. It is very relevant and relates the Pope's and Nina's charts to the winter solstice of 2012. From looking at them, it seemed to me that the position of Saturn close to 15 degrees of Sagittarius, or the opposite sign Gemini, might have some special significance. I tried looking at the fixed stars, but nothing seemed to fit. Then I remembered that the center of our galaxy is in Sagittarius, so I fired up Stellarium and had a look. Stellarium is an incredible piece of free software. It is an extremely detailed and powerful planetarium in your computer. I recommend it wholeheartedly To those who are interested in astronomy or astrology, it is packed with features. Here is Stellarium's depiction of the relevant part of the sky when the Pope-related event happened on the 10th of September 1987 at 6:20 a.m. local time or 12:20 Greenwich Mean Time. Let's zoom in on Saturn. Now let's add the ecliptic and the galactic equator. These two lines represent our orbit around the Sun and the Sun's approximate orbit around the centre of the galaxy. At the centre of the galaxy is a remnant of a supernova referred to as Sagittarius A East. Let's add it. Astronomers believe that Sagittarius A is a supermassive black hole whose mass is about 140 million times that of the Sun. I don't believe black holes exist, and I think electromagnetic forces account for a lot of the effects that are attributed to Sagittarius A's mass. However, it is definitely an extremely massive object, and as such, in vital astrology, it acts like a central sun of a massive solar system that is the galaxy. The galactic equator acts like the ecliptic for that system, and thus, in relation to our ecliptic, it establishes what might be called a galactic zodiac. We can see that the ecliptic and the galactic equator intersect here. This point therefore represents the cusp of galactic Aries. If we place the winter solstice on the star map, we can see that it is very close to the intersection, but not yet exactly there. The precession of the equinoxes causes the solstice to move a little each year. As we are looking at the solstice, it will move to the right as the years pass. This will bring it into alignment with the intersection at some future time. The Mayan calendar suggests that that future time should be the 21st of December 2012. Before we look ahead though, I want to point out something very significant. If I turn on a grid that shows the galactic coordinate system like this, we can see that there is a grid line which passes through Sagittarius A. It indicates angle 0 in galactic coordinates. In vital astrology, any object on this line is at the same point in the galactic zodiac as Sagittarius A, and is therefore in conjunction with it. If I turn on the ecliptic coordinates, which define the cusps of the normal zodiac, we can see that Sagittarius A is at an entirely different position in that zodiac, but Saturn is almost exactly on the galactic grid line that passes directly through Sagittarius A. This means that Saturn was in a very strong galactic conjunction with the galactic sun at the time of the Pope-related event, and similarly was in strong galactic opposition to the galactic sun for Nina's birthday. Later, I discovered that there are actually two ways to establish a galactic zodiac, but that is a topic for another video. Now let's see what happens if we step forward year by year. As we do so, we can see that the solstice is moving towards the right and approaching the intersection of the ecliptic and galactic equator. Now it has come into more or less exact conjunction with it. If we look at the date, we see it is not the 21st of December 2012. it is in fact in 1998. At first I thought that this must mean that the Mayans had made an error of a few years, but then I remembered that the solar system does not orbit the galactic center by following the galactic equator exactly. It is currently around 55 light-years above the galactic equator and is moving upwards at 7.25 kilometers per second. That may sound like a lot, but the component of the solar system's motion parallel to the galactic equator is estimated to be somewhere around 220 kilometers per second. When we combine these two components of the Sun's galactic motion, the true galactic ecliptic is revealed to be like this. As we can see, that moves the intersection to the right a bit. Let's step forward again and see when the solstice intersects it. Now we see that the solstice has come into alignment with the intersection and the year is 2012. There is a significant margin of error for the estimated values of the Sun's galactic motion, but this alignment falls well within that margin, and it seems likely to me that more accurate figures would confirm this picture. So this very significant astrological event could well have occurred at the winter solstice of 2012. What did it mean astrologically? What it meant is that the 2012 solstice was probably the first solstice of a new age. Many have suggested it was the start of the age of Aquarius, but the 2012 solstice did not have an Aquarian essence. What the event actually represented was an alignment of the normal zodiac and the galactic zodiac. That alignment was not equinox to equinox and solstice to solstice, however. It was equinox to solstice. It meant that the two zodiacs were exactly square to each other. We can get a good idea about its astrology if we compare it to similar events that happen at a solar system scale. The ecliptic is a line that represents the path we see the sun taking through the sky. It seems to be just a line to us because it is a circle centered upon us. In the animation that is playing, the camera perspective is not Earth-centered. This allows us to see that the ecliptic is in fact a plane. That plane intersects with the plane defined by the Earth's equator. We can also see from the animation that the sun always stays in the ecliptic plane, but wanders above and below the equatorial plane throughout the year. There are only two places in the sun's motion where it is in both planes. These are the spring and autumn equinoxes. They represent the cusps of Aries and Libra, respectively, and thus define the orientation of the whole zodiac. This is how we map out the solar zodiac, but there is another zodiac we could map out for the Earth. It is a lunar zodiac. Its signs are known as the moon's node houses. The lunar zodiac is defined by another plane's relationship to the ecliptic plane. Let's call it the moon's plane. It is defined by the motion of the Earth and the moon around their common center of mass. The places where the moon's plane and the ecliptic plane intersect are called the nodes of the moon. Mostly astrologers only use the north and south nodes, but there is actually an entire zodiac defined by them and mapped out around the moon's plane. Times when the sun and moon come into conjunction or opposition near to a node are very special. They are when we get eclipses. Most astrologers will tell you that these times represent a new energy being infused into the earth. Metaphorically speaking, that is true, but a big part of my work is to make astrology a proper science, and that involves a more fundamental understanding of vague poetic metaphors. When we understand that the nodes define a lunar zodiac and show where it intersects with the solar zodiac, we can see that when the sun and moon come into alignment with a node simultaneously, it represents a synchronization of the moon's rhythm with the sun's position. When the sun and moon occupy opposite nodes via an opposition, we get a lunar eclipse. Where they occupy the same node via conjunction, we get a solar eclipse. Either way, it represents a synchronization of the sun and moon, and thus a new beginning, one infused with the essence of the zodiacal position of the eclipse. Now that we have understood all that, we can see the 2012 solstice in a whole new light. The relationship of our sun to the galactic sun can be likened to that of the moon to our sun. The relationship of our ecliptic to the galactic ecliptic is like that of the moon's plane to our ecliptic. So the intersection of these two ecliptics are in fact the galactic equivalents of the moon's nodes. What happened at the winter solstice of 2012 was a very special kind of galactic solar eclipse. Not only did our zodiac align square to the galactic zodiac, at the same time we had a galactic solar eclipse. Now it is true that the sun did not obscure Sagittarius A on that day. That is not what matters. What brings in the new energy is the alignment and synchronization. One might consider the galactic eclipse to be a sort of rock bottom of galactic astrology. Our sun came into conjunction with the galactic sun at the height of our astrological winter, but the beginning of galactic spring. The winter solstice is the time of the year when the sun begins the journey back to summer. We are now therefore in a new age, which is where humanity rises back up towards a new golden age. Now let's look at the chart for the 13th of January of this year. The first thing to notice is that the Sun, Saturn and Pluto are in a tight conjunction. Recall that these three planets are in a tight T-square in Nina's chart. Once again, Mercury is playing an important role. He is also part of the conjunction. The North Node is in Cancer again, and whilst Jupiter is not also in Cancer, he is in the opposite sign Capricorn, making a very tight opposition to the North Node. What is this chart saying? And remember, much of this also applies to Nina's chart. On this day, it was announced to the world that the first case of what I shall call the pestilence had been discovered outside its alleged country of origin. That idea was a terrifying prospect for humanity, and thus the event might be seen as very negative. However, I see this chart as challenging, yet also very positive. How is the chart challenging? It is challenging because of the conjunction of the Sun, Mercury, Saturn and Pluto in Saturn's sign Capricorn. This is a chart that places a tremendous focus on Saturn because there are so many planets in Capricorn, and as if that were not significant enough, this strong four-planet conjunction happened within a degree of Saturn's throne, which is at 21.1 degrees of Capricorn. See my video about thrones to learn more about them. The North Node is the key to understanding the new experience that is being gleaned from the essences in a chart. That presents a bit of a puzzle in this chart. The chart is heavily overbalanced by all the planets in Capricorn. Jupiter in particular seems to frustrate the North Node's purpose by being in very strong opposition to it. Whereas the North Node speaks about the new experience we are stepping into, all those planets in Capricorn give that experience a very Capricornian flavour. This raises an important question. How can all these planets in Capricorn manifest as an experience of the opposite Cancerian essence? They represent a time when we seemed stuck in the limitations of Saturn and Capricorn, the passionate energy of Jupiter seemingly oppressed by hard Capricornian stoicism and graft. It has deprived us of abundance and the cosy Cancerian felt ease of home and family. It has even brought Saturnian limitations into our home by imprisoning us there. Capricorn is the sign of Jupiter's fall, where he is at the opposite position to his exaltation in Cancer. Jupiter's abundance seems limited in Capricorn. However, the key to a proper understanding of this chart is to realize that Jupiter's faith and abundance is never limited. It is just that it seems so because it is being entirely invested in an entrepreneurial venture. To throw off the control of an illegitimate Saturnian authority, we cannot just rebel. We need to study and work our way to success via such a venture, so that we become our own authority. No feature of any chart is ever negated. They all have their purposes, which always play out. So even though the heavy weight of planets in Capricorn seemed to frustrate the new experience of the Cancerian North Node, that is just an appearance. The new experience depicted in this chart is still moving towards Cancer. That is something that I see as very positive because the chart insists that it is happening, whereas all the planets in Capricorn manifested in ways that very much seem to threaten us with the opposite. Essentially, what this chart represents is an essence of being totally fed up with the limitations, privations, harsh discipline, overbearing control freakery, and authoritarianism that are seemingly negative manifestations of Saturn challenges. We can see that essence clearly with 2020 hindsight. So why do I say this chart is actually very positive? In addition to what I have already said about the North Node, the chart is also positive because of Jupiter. Even though Jupiter seems weak in Capricorn because of his commitment to the hard climb up Capricorn's mountain of understanding, that is exactly what was needed to take us to the summit where we can overstand what previously seemed like insurmountable restrictions. It has indeed been a hard slog in the intervening months. Now, as we approach the coming solstice, Jupiter and Saturn are finishing the climb and are about to enter Aquarius. The climb has been one which has been moving our experience towards the nurturing essence of Cancer in a Saturnian way. It has been doing so via Saturnian loss. A line from Joni Mitchell's song Big Yellow Taxi comes to mind. Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? This has been a big year where we have learned the value of family via an oppressive Saturnian control freakery. just as Nina's birthday brought that realization home via its own version of familial loss. This crisis is what humanity needed. Too many of us have been sheep, blindly obeying any control freak with the ambition to rise up the greasy pole. We had to learn the hard way because this world has been dominated by the power ethic for so long and is still very much under its spell. See my videos on the power ethic for a deeper understanding of what that means. Whenever I read a chart, I first look at the nodes to see the essential nature of the new experiential direction, and that leads me to the planets associated with it. In this case, that means Saturn and the Moon. Saturn rules Capricorn, the essence of the old experience, and the Moon rules Cancer, the essence of the new experience we are stepping into. We can see that the Moon is in creative and lovingly passionate, Sun-ruled Leo in this chart. So the new experience we are stepping into due to this event is one that is bringing creative freedom home to the human family. Although this challenge has initially separated families, that has only been because we needed to feel the value of the nurturing support our tribe can provide. We needed to feel that in order to motivate us to engage with Saturn's discipline and thus transcend the limitations. In order to understand the most significant way in which this chart is positive, we need to understand Saturn and Pluto more deeply, and what they mean when they come into conjunction. Traditionally, Saturn was seen as one of the baddies of astrology. He and Mars used to be called the malefics. That was a serious slander caused by a lack of proper understanding. All astrological essences are nothing but positive. We turn them dark by creating our own suffering when we react from a lack of clear comprehension. Saturn is an excellent example of that. When we don't comprehend a challenge Saturn presents us with, we end up standing under the illegitimate authority of people who seem to control us, or events which appear to limit and oppress us. These events are actually there for us to learn from. Saturn requires a discipline of study. We are required to look dispassionately at the writing on the wall of our situation. If we do so, we can learn how to cope with it. We can be the author of our own lives instead of being dictated to. If we respond to Saturn by rebelling from a place of impatient frustration, we get smacked down. If we react from fear, we experience loss. Saturn is a planet of fear because authority scares people, and so does the potential for loss. These are things that 2020 hindsight makes clear. Pluto is another planet whose essence is often feared, but for another reason. Saturn's purpose is to bless us with freedom by offering us the opportunity to study and learn to be in control of our lives. Pluto offers us empowerment by presenting us with events that challenge our emotional digestion. One of the things that severely challenge our valid empowerment is to be terrorized into giving it up. People who are dedicated to the power ethic use fear and intimidation to disempower their victims. It is not just fear that will work, though. Any unpleasantness will make people reluctant to face things. There is an excellent metaphor for this side of Pluto from the film Dogma. In Dogma, there is a scene where the Golgothan, a demon composed of blood and excrement, emerges from a toilet. I find it to be a good contender for the most disgusting scene in a movie ever, but it sums up the challenge that Pluto presents us with beautifully, right down to the way the Golgothan was eventually defeated. If we have a weak emotional stomach and would rather not face unpleasant, scary things, then those who would rob us of our empowerment need only intimidate us with unpleasantness, and we become compliant. If we combine that fear with the imposition of Saturnian authoritarianism, our compliance becomes enslavement. It is as if those who do not want to deal with unpleasantness themselves grovel to Big Daddy authority, begging him to sort it out. That is not so damaging when the authority is benevolent. When it is not, there is massive scope for abuse, and that is what Pluto has been exposing all these years since he went into Capricorn in 2008. Pluto blesses us by bringing unpleasantness to the surface. He is like a drain rod pushing our Golgothan into the light. There it may terrify us and stink up the place, but at least we then know what has been festering under the surface all along. This year, our collective Golgothan was unleashed in January and has been terrorizing us and stinking up the world with fear ever since. I will leave a link to a video clip of the Golgothan scene in the description. In it, you can see that fighting the Golgothan does no good. We have to de-stink him instead. Pluto is a feeling planet. I call him variously the planet of empowerment, unconditional love, and grief. This is because to develop a less conditional love, we need to heal our inner wounds by feeling and thus properly grieving them. When we have healed a given wound, it can no longer be used as a button to compel our compliance. In this way, we develop a stronger emotional stomach so we can face reality and cope with it more intelligently. Ultimately, those who are immune to life's Golgothan are immune to intimidation. They value real ethical behavior and thus are masters of serendipitous empowerment. See my BitChute exclusive about that if you want to learn more. Pluto has been in Capricorn for some years now. When he entered Capricorn, there was a clear sea change in the way his challenge manifested. The essence of the previous sign, Sagittarius, often manifests as faith, and although religion is by no means a perfect manifestation of the Sagittarian essence, it is one. Thus, whilst Pluto was in Sagittarius, the Plutonian Golgothan exposed the abuses of power via religious terrorism. Even before Pluto entered Capricorn, those who had the stomach to face difficult truths dug down and learned that the terrorists were really just the face of the problem. As Pluto has worked his way through Capricorn, it has become more and more obvious that the real terrorists are those who control us via an illegitimate authority. Before January, the stench of that abuse had been growing stronger. Then the Golgothan emerged and has been stinking up the world big time. Those who unleashed him want to terrorize us all into submission. I think they have some skillful astrologers in their ranks, but there is one thing that they reckon without. They are deeply enslaved by their dedication to the power ethic, and that means they cannot understand charts like this properly. I think they would look at this chart and see an excellent opportunity for another ritual. I look at this chart and see a massive exposure of the emperor's lack of clothes. That perspective is supported by another event that happened on that day. Because of the central role in the conjunction played by the sun, there is a lot of fire contained in it. Although Pluto is chiefly a feeling water planet, he also has a fiery dimension. I have often likened him to magma building up beneath the surface of things. In my readings, I have expressed this through the example of the difference between Etna and Mount St. Helens. If you see Pluto as a friend, you can have a relatively calm relationship with him, like the slow pedestrian eruptions of Etna. If you try to ignore the signs of abuse he exposes, then sooner or later the lid will blow off your ignorance, and you will get a Mount St. Helens or a Vesuvian Pompeii type experience. Another way that Pluto in Sagittarius manifested was via the banking collapse of 2008. There had been evidence of irresponsible lending practices for a few years prior, but it was all swept under the rug and ignored. When it actually blew up, it pointed to the root of the problem, which is the evil of fractional reserve banking. Once again, it was swept under the rug, however, and now we are looking at total enslavement by the plutocrats in their Great Reset. Money has always been their key to power. Now it is pretty obvious that the old adage applies to the Golgothan. Where there's muck, there's brass. This year has always been about enslavement via money. We can see that via the involvement of planet of abundance Jupiter. On the 12th of January, in the run-up to the peak conjunction, we actually got a real physical eruption. The Taal volcano in the Philippines erupted, and on the 13th it began spewing out a fountain of lava. Before we look at the chart for the upcoming solstice, there is one more important thing to point out about this chart. It is this big red triangle, like the one in Nina's chart. It is formed by the North Node and Jupiter, with the third corner being Chiron. I used to think of Uranus as the planet of truth, but that is a much better description of Chiron. Uranus is the planet of a new, more truthful paradigm, so he puts truth in your face, often in a suddenly shocking manner. However, truths are realized at the cusp of Aquarius, and whereas Uranus's throne is at 16.3 degrees of Aquarius, Chiron's throne is at 4 degrees. Thus his is a very pointed essence, because the truth is one, whereas lies are legion. If we don't get Chiron's point by seeing the truth he points out, we get the point in another less pleasant way. Notice that Chiron is in Mars-ruled Aries. The challenging combination of Chiron and Mars often manifests through the stabbing of things or even people with sharp objects. I have observed Chiron to be prominent in the charts of dressmakers and needleworkers of all kinds. The upcoming solstice conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn will occur in conjunction with Chiron's throne. Now that Jupiter has worked his way to the end of Capricorn and is approaching the conjunction, it is no surprise to me that certain people who have not seen the truth of Chiron are beginning to get the point in another way. Now let's look at the chart of the coming solstice, which I think is very positive. Once again, we have Mercury in strong conjunction with the Sun in this chart. This time, however, Mercury will be communicating a message centered upon the new age we entered at the 2012 solstice. The solstice moves very slowly, and so every solstice since 2012 has been a galactic solar eclipse. This is what happens with galactic eclipses. They happen not only on the years of the exact alignment, but in multiple years leading up to it and afterwards. What changed in 2012 is that the galactic eclipses changed from being in galactic Pisces to galactic Aries, from winter to spring. So the energy we receive from the galaxy is now a vibrant springtime one. We are now in the beginning of the end of winter. Amazingly, this coming galactic eclipse was preceded on the 14th of December by a solar eclipse. Since the galactic eclipse spans many days either side of its peak, these two eclipses happened simultaneously. One might be tempted to think that a perfect synchronization would have been more positive, but that is not so. Since the solar eclipse happened earlier, it was in Sagittarius, which gave it the exact essence we need. We did not need to have a Capricornian essence infused at this time. A courageous essence of Sagittarian real faith is exactly what we needed, and that is what we got. Also, the previous solar eclipse in June was in Cancer, which helped us move away from Capricorn. The role of Mercury is important in this chart because the North Node is now in Gemini, the sign Mercury co-rules. So the new experience of this time is no longer about home and family. It is now about Geminian open-mindedness and communication. It is now time to broadcast the overstanding of how to throw off the chains of the enslavement which so obviously cast a huge shadow over our homes and family whilst the North Node was in Cancer. In this chart, all the planets which were in Capricorn in January have now left it, except for Pluto, who still has some exposing of authoritarian abuse to do until 2023. The Sun and Mercury are now re-entering Capricorn at the beginning. However, Saturn's conjunction with Jupiter is now focusing and channeling his faith in an Aquarian direction. We still have a slog ahead of us, but it is a climb towards truth and freedom. Notice that in addition to the conjunction happening close to Chiron, planet of truth's throne, there is also this challenging square between the Sun, Mercury and Chiron. What does that connection represent? The Sun and Mercury represent the light of a communication. Once again, the light of their message is focused on Capricornian authoritarianism. This time, however, it is also square to Chiron, who is in Aries, sign of self-determination. The reason why square connections are challenging is that it is not always easy to see how their essences can be squared. They often seem to be at odds. In this case, authority often seems at odds with self-determination. That is only so, however, when the authority is illegitimate. True authority does not seek to control others. It is purely about sharing one's wisdom and overstanding in a helpful way. So what we have in this connection is a message about how authoritarianism is seeking to dominate self-determination, and the challenge is to spread the light of that message in spite of the oppressive control freakery. Clearly, because Chiron is involved, the issue is sharply focused on how people are going to get the point. There is one more thing I want to point out about this chart, a thing which I see as very positive. Normally, I don't include Eris in a chart. My astrology software doesn't do Eris. However, in this case, it is so important that I am going to add her myself. Here she is, at 23 degrees 29 minutes of Aries. We can see that Mars is at 23 degrees and 13 minutes of Aries, closely approaching his exact conjunction with Eris. This conjunction is happening very close to the throne of Planet of Bravery E2000 PJ30, which is at 22.6 degrees of Aries. This puts a lot of self-determined energy behind any golden apples Eris might toss into the mix. See my video Eris, the Gold in Malicious, for an understanding of that. I think that there are some powerful golden apples that have been being tossed in the run-up to the solstice, and some potentially massive ones yet to come. They are golden apples of Geminian information and Sagittarian faith. I will leave links in the description to videos about them. What I find encouraging is that the people tossing these apples are Sagittarians. That is all for now. Thank you for your attention and have a happy solstice.